When it comes to talking about the NFL draft, one of the biggest topics of conversation are where are the quarterbacks going to land? And when it comes to looking at value for the draft and team building, it seems like every team needs one these days. So we're going to talk about the quarterbacks in the 2023 NFL draft. I'm going to break it down with NBC Sports NFL draft analyst Connor Rogers. You also see him on SNY. Connor, are you ready to talk about some QBs?
Always am, especially with the demand of this market in the draft every year. And we're spoiled this year. We're bad. Last year was a little bit of a down year, but we're guaranteed to have at least 4 in the first round of this year's draft, and maybe even more.
And the thing is, when you're getting 4 in the first round of the draft, the question that comes to my mind, right, is how many of these guys are actually going to be good, right? Because we've seen times where there's been a bunch of quarterbacks, but maybe you get one out of them that is a perennial Pro Bowler or All-Pro. You don't see that all the time. So I want to let the people know here what we have is Connor has broken down his QBs into various tiers, which is how I like to discuss when it comes to drafting players, right? You got to know the tiers and levels of what they are. So going into this, in your tier, you have a tier 1. In the top of that tier, you have Bryce Young and you have CJ Stroud. What makes the both of them so special to you that they are at the top and separated themselves from everyone else?
Well, you start with Bryce, who stands alone as the top quarterback in this draft, and my number 2 overall player in the entire class is the fact that he's incredible at dealing with pressure, whether it's seeing it pre-snap, reading coverages post-snap or pre-snap, and the ability to deliver the ball on time consistently. And he's very accurate at all 3 levels of the field. Most times when you look at undersized passers, what you ask yourself is, well, I know they're short, but how does it impact their play? And the number one thing you traditionally find yourself dealing with is their ability to see the middle of the field, their field vision. And with Bryce, he's an elite middle of the field thrower, so you don't share those concerns with him because of how well he sees the field, how he could put the football right in the pocket of wide receivers, even down the field. He doesn't have the strongest arm, but he has adequate arm strength. But what's between the ears for Bryce Young makes him special. I think he has a twitchy lower half that allows him to reset when dealing with pressure or scrambling and throw in tight corridors, tight windows, really reoperate as a pocket passer when he needs to. But Bryce is just a special player in terms of the IQ and always knowing where to throw the ball to avoid turnovers and give his playmakers the best chance. Then you get into Stroud. He's somebody that he does struggle more so against pressure, and it's against pressure, not against the blitz. I think he sees the blitz extremely well, but when his line doesn't hold up very well, Stroud is not shown to be this dynamic playmaker on a consistent basis. I think he did a great job of it against Georgia in the biggest game of his college career, but on a week-by-week basis, it wasn't there. And it's something at the NFL Combine he was very vocal about, that he needs to become a little bit more of a runner or more of a scrambler to keep throwing. But in rhythm, in structure, in the pocket, Stroud is phenomenal. He has a bigger arm than Bryce Young. He's got a bigger body. He's somebody that can really push the ball, and it's effortless. All of his dropbacks and his throwing motion and tying his mechanics, whether it's his base to his shoulders and his eyes, it's all very repeatable with Stroud. So you love that you get him in the right offense where he's asked to throw on time, asked to push the ball, and you just keep him upright. He'll kill you. He'll rip you up. So that's why these two are in a really, really special tier of their own at the top to be franchise quarterbacks, because when everything was around them, everything worked around them, they were phenomenal. But when you look at both of them, when things went wrong, they still made plays in their own right as well.
That's one of the things when it comes to quarterbacks, right? Seeing what they can do when everything isn't working well for them. And that's a good way to separate them from the rest of the pack. I want to get back to Young for a second here, Connor, because you brought up some of the concerns that people have about his size, and you said he's still able to pass well to the middle of the field despite how short he is and doesn't have a lot of the weight on him. Is that a concern when you look at the talent at the next level, the speed, the physicality that he will see at the NFL level? Does the size still concern you at all, or do you think his intellect, his smarts, allows him to overcome some of those limitations that he has physically?
It's both, right? The fact of how well he sees things before the snap keeps him out of trouble on a consistent basis. But the reality is, I mean, this is the NFL. You're going to find yourself in trouble. You're going to find yourself getting hit. It's just how it goes. And getting hit at the NFL level is even much different than the SEC. And Bryce Young was a guy that I found He'd go down from one-arm tackles at times. It just doesn't take much to bring him down. You do worry if somebody lines him up on a blind side or a slot blitz kind of play and gets one big hit on him, how is his durability going to react overall? So that's the question that teams have with Bryce Young. And it's one of those things that, quite truthfully, you can't get an answer from a combine weight. I don't care that he came in at over 200 pounds. He didn't play at 200 pounds at the college level. So you have to have a plan for Bryce. You have to protect him. Fortunately, the rules of the game, or sometimes unfortunately to the frustration of fans, do protect quarterbacks in this era better than we've seen in the past. So you're going to be holding your breath when he gets hit. But I'll counter with this. All quarterbacks at the NFL level these days get hurt because they get hit. It's not just the smaller guys. Josh Allen dealt with a significant elbow injury last year. Patrick Mahomes has dealt with ankle injuries. It's the nature of the league. You just have to protect yourself, limit those situations for you. And I think Bryce does a good enough or an adequate job of doing that where he'll be okay. But I understand the risk assessment a lot of teams at the top of the draft are dealing with.
All right, Bryce Young, we'll see if he is able to get it done, but he is in Connor's tier 1 of quarterbacks here as far as the 2023 NFL draft. Going down to tier 2, Anthony Richardson. And Connor, you know this, you hear a lot of the talk about him, is that the athleticism is off the charts. Do you view him as the biggest boom or bust QB here in this draft? Because he looks like he could be killing it at the next level, but is he really ready for the NFL? Is he the kind of guy that maybe if he is picked by a team should maybe sit for a year? What do you think about Anthony Richardson and his prospects at the next level?
I think sitting for at least part of the year would really benefit him. Now, the boom or bust question is fascinating to me because the boom could be a top 5 quarterback in the NFL. But when you look at the bust, you think of a guy that's out of the league in 2 to 3 years. And with Richardson, I don't see that in his game. I think the rushing sets the floor. He's an elite runner. He probably could have ran even more this year. I mean, he had over 700 rushing yards, 9 rushing touchdowns. He's somebody that can also throw the deep ball extremely, extremely well. I mean, when you look at his deep passing this year, he finished 26 for 64 with a 15.6 yards per attempt, 9 touchdowns, and only 2 interceptions. So the passes that are 20-plus yards, he was phenomenal. At PFF, he graded out at a high range because he completed his deep shots, and he took those chances down the field. And the 9-to-2 touchdown to interception ratio is phenomenal. It's the short stuff with Richardson that you worry about. The delivery on short throws, it lacks consistency. When he's throwing deeper stuff, the motion and everything is tied together. With the short stuff, it feels like the base does not match his upper body, and he just kind of short arms it at times or is not overall comfortable in that stature. Or I don't like to say lazy because it's not lazy, but he lets his mechanics go. So the great quarterback coaches, like, whether it's a Frank Reich or Josh McCown, and I know they're picking number 1, so that might be a little rich, but the great coaches in the league, they'll clean up the easy stuff. We had this conversation about Josh Allen coming into the NFL from Wyoming, which Richardson will be on a similar trajectory if all goes right for him. They'll deal with the easy stuff. Can you do the hard? Can you throw the ball down the field? Can you take hits? Can you scramble? Can you run? Are you a team leader? Do you have high character? Richardson matches all of those things. So that's why he's in tier 2 of his own. He needs to play more. Let's not forget, this is somebody that he really only had that 1 full year starting experience. His last 7 games of the year, he got better than the first half of the season, which gives you a lot of promise. So I like Richardson. I think he's completely justifiable as a top 10 pick. You just need to understand that he needs some seasoning and requires some patience. But what he can do for you from a big play threat as a rookie is certainly enticing.
I'm wondering with him, and you brought that point up, that is it really for him about getting into the right situation? Because you mentioned he only started 24 games for Florida. Can he get into the right situation? Is he the kind of prospect that you think somebody could think about, a team might think about saying, hey, we might have him at tier 2, but we think with our coaching situation, we might be able to move him up to a tier 1 because of the potential? And do any teams at the top of the draft have the time to let someone like an Anthony Richardson develop? Do you see that happening?
Well, I look at it like this, right? There's a team at the top of the draft that would love to get out of their selection that could let one of those teams in. And that's the Arizona Cardinals at 3, who I think would love to move on from that pick. And you look at a team like Tennessee, who's picking at 11 with new GM Rand Carthon, who might sit there and say, I have time. I could be patient. I have a veteran quarterback on an expiring deal in Ryan Tannehill. that could play this year and play well. Ryan Tannehill is fine as a starting quarterback in the NFL. So what about a team like that has a situation built in that you go, well, he'll have time and I have time, so we can be tied together in terms of our employment for this franchise. And if all goes right, we're going to be here playing in big games for a really, really long time. So I do think and I look at the Colts as well. Chris Ballard does not have time. He needs to get this right. But you hired Shane Steichen from Philadelphia, who did a lot of work with Jalen Hurts to utilize his mobility at the next level while he continued to grow as a passer. So that makes Steichen a great pairing for Richardson as well. So there are landing spots for him very, very early in this draft that I think would help his development. And the team side of it is, well, if we strike rich on this one in year 2 or year 3 of his development, we have a top 8, maybe top 5 quarterback in all of football.
Want to move to your tier 3, right? Because you've got Will Levis and Hendon Hooker of Tennessee here. Do you see either of these guys definitively being drafted in the first round? If there was one that misses out, who do you think that will be not getting picked in the first round? Because you did say you think 4 guys could go in the first round this year. Do you think both of these guys get in? Would we see 5, or does somebody on the outside looking in and gets drafted in round 2?
I think Hooker is the guy that could miss out. When you look at him, now he could sneak into round 1 as well, but when you just look at Hendon Hooker, he's an older prospect, right? He's already 25 years old. He's coming off the torn ACL. He played in a system where he was absolutely phenomenal. I mean, he completely ripped it up. You just look at the numbers from the last couple of years. The last 2 seasons, he's had 631 pass attempts. He's thrown 5 interceptions. He doesn't turn the football over. But on the flip side of it, when pressured, he took a lot of sacks. I mean, on 93 pressured dropbacks last year, he was sacked 27 times. So he needs to play with a little bit more urgency in those pressure situations to get the football out and avoid taking those sacks. So I think with Hooker, he's a guy that a team might sell themselves on going back into round 1 for, because you get the 5th-year option, and he's not going to be ready for you out of the gate this year. You'd like those 5 years of team control plus 2 franchise tags after that, as we've often seen utilized at the NFL level. And it kind of brings me to why Will Levis will be a first-round pick. These guys both have developmental curves, but with Levis, you could see everything got worse around him in 2022, and he struggled because of that. I mean, he had 15 passes dropped in 2022, but you'd like to see more big plays. You'd like to see throws down the field. You'd like to see teams utilize his arm strength outside the numbers more and the timing and decision-making to improve. So I think Levis is a guy that will ultimately go in the top 12 picks of the draft. I don't know if he's ready to play. It feels like the speed of the game is not there for him yet, but with the arm strength, the frame, the short yardage rushing, like the rest of the top quarterbacks in this draft, he is a leader. He's somebody that I think ultimately still goes in the first half of the first round.
Okay, Connor, so when we talk about quarterbacks, we like to talk a lot about what these guys can do when they get to the next level, but we know everybody doesn't always get this right. Of these 5 guys we've discussed, who do you think has the best chance to be a bust? Who do you think is the biggest risk here that you would say, if you're a team, that you might stay away from?
I think it's Levis, because when you talk about bust factor, you have to value where they're going and what their floor is. And I think with Levis, he's going very, very early. I'm assuming he's going earlier than Hendon Hooker. But I look at his floor, and I still think it's really, really low because of the fact of the lack of timing on intermediate throws that could lead to interceptions or just bad plays overall. So you look at Levis, that's a big risk for me. You're talking about him going a couple picks after or even before guys like Stroud and Richardson. That doesn't make a lot of sense to me. He's already going to be 24 when training camp starts. You have Richardson, who played this season as a 20-year-old. That's a big difference physically and from a maturity standpoint. So there's a lot of tools I like about Will Levis, and I understand why a team would use a first-round pick on him because they think the reward can be huge. But I think the tier of him and Hooker, who are outside the top 30 overall players in the draft for me, the learning curve is a lot steeper than a lot of people want to admit. And if they don't figure it out early, well, they're already older prospects as it is.
I want to go back to Richardson for a second, for everything you talked about him and his ability to throw the deep ball. Do you think he has the biggest upside of any quarterback in this draft? You talked about Levis, you think having the biggest bust potential, but does Richardson have the biggest upside of anyone in this draft? And who also would you compare him to that is in the league right now?
Well, I really look at him and just see that Wyoming Josh Allen, where sometimes it's out of control, but sometimes it's as pretty as you'll ever see, with the ability to roll out. Nobody's going to catch him. Nobody wants to hit him, and he could throw the ball a mile. And if there's nobody in front of him playing with urgent feet, he could tuck it and run, and not run for 5 yards, not fall over for 4, run for 50 or 55 or 60 yards. So Richardson has the highest ceiling. I understand the fear about the floor, but when you talk about tapping into the ceiling, I mean, the guy is 6'4". He's 244 pounds. He can run like the wind. He's an explosive athlete. I think he truly is dialed into trying to be a pass first and second quarterback, run third. And if you get in his brain, it's okay to run a little bit more. You're talking about a dynamic athlete that typically doesn't exist at the NFL level at that size. We love Lamar Jackson's running ability. Lamar Jackson's been banged up a lot because of the frame. Richardson really won't have to worry about that. So the big playability with Richardson is very, very unique. And it might play out a little similar to Josh Allen. I'm not saying he'll reach the ceiling Josh Allen has, but you deal with a couple bad plays because you've got twice as many big plays. That feels like the trajectory that you would fall in love with Richardson at the NFL level.
We talked about Bryce Young at the top of this, and you think he's the best prospect overall here. Do you see him being taken number 1 overall here, or do you see the Panthers maybe taking a risk and going with somebody else?
I think he goes number 1. I think logic always prevails, and he's the best quarterback in this draft. There are a lot of evaluators in that room that understand the position better than anybody else in the league. Bryce can be a distributor, he could be a playmaker, but most importantly, he gets you to the line of scrimmage, and he understands everything about him and has the cool, calm demeanor that everything's going to be okay. If he takes a hit and gets back up, I didn't really see a fear of the next play or a hesitancy of the next play. So when you look at Bryce Young, that pre-snap IQ, the ability to operate under pressure when things get hard, and things always get hard at the NFL level, I think he's so good in those areas, so much better than everybody else, that will carry him to the finish line of being the first overall selection.
All right, we will see who it will be. Will it be Bryce Young? Will it be somebody else? We will know on April 27th of the NFL Draft. Connor Rogers, he's doing a lot of work till we get to that point. He'll have his eye on the QBs and all the picks on that night. Connor, thank you for your insight. Appreciate it.
Thank you, man.